I get a lot of questions when it comes to African cichlids, and probably my most frequently asked question is what aquarium size is needed for African cichlids. A lot of the questions are, will this fish fit into this tank, kind of a thing. So today what I thought I would do is make one video kind of talking all about African cichlids and aquarium sizes. Hey fish friends, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Zenzo from Tazawa Tanks. Now I'm going to be covering quite a bit today, so I'm going to be speaking passionately, a lot, quickly, whatever. But I do want to kind of cover this topic because it does come up all the time. And I've made many videos about African cichlid aquarium sizes, which is probably why I get all the questions. And thought what I would do is just kind of make one video to kind of capture all of it together. So that way in the future, I can just share this video and they can watch it when they have that question. I won't be covering in this video is stocking as far as how many fish can fit in this tank. I've made that video before a few times. I will put the most recent one either on the link up above or down below in the description, or probably at the end of this video. So somewhere there will be a link that will take you to that so you can watch it later on, which will talk about how many fish go in this size tank. Also, we're going to be talking about standard aquarium sizes. So we're going to be talking about the normal tanks that you would see in most of the aquarium stores that you go to that are built by, you know, many of the manufacturers that we know. We're not talking about anything custom, you know, like for example, this tank behind me, it's not a normal size. It's 90 gallons, but it's longer. It's 6 feet, not 6 feet, but 60 inches wide versus 48, like a normal 90. So it's a little bit larger. So think more about dimensions rather than gallons as we go through this. So it will make more sense as we kind of talk more about gallons versus dimensions and why that's important. So again, we're talking about kind of standard tank sizes. Now, the other thing I do want to cover is just because you've done something in your aquarium doesn't mean it's right for everybody. So I don't want to hear people say, yeah, well, I keep peacocks in a 20-gallon tank and they've been perfect for 20 years. Yes, in your specific situation, the way that you keep fish, your water parameters, your husbandry, your breeding project, whatever, yes, it may work. But it's not going to work for the majority of people out there. I've kept, African cichlids in small tanks before for breeding purposes, quarantine purposes, grow out purposes. So yeah, for those, outlier situations, sure, you can do a lot of different things. You could keep fish in a bucket if it's just for a day. But we're talking more about display tanks for someone to just sit there in their living room, in their bedroom, and look at it and enjoy it and not have to deal with chaos and a bunch of fish fighting all the time and having to do water changes every 3 or 4 days. We're kind of talking just more about the general stuff. Now, when it comes to African cichlids, that's kind of a very large category. So I want to really narrow this down and make people understand that we're talking about fish from Lake Malawi, specifically peacocks, Alanacara. We're talking about mbuna, and we're talking about haps, haplochromis. So we're not talking about fish from West Africa like jewel cichlids. We're not talking about Tanganyikan fish, which I love too. I've got them in several tanks. We're not talking about, Lake Victorian fish or anything different. We're talking just about the most common fish from Lake Malawi, which are your peacocks, mbuna, and your haps. Now, these suggestions that I'm giving are to help people understand the easy way of doing things and to kind of mitigate avoid aggression, high volume water changes, stuff like that. So keep that in mind again as you're watching this video. So starting off, let's talk about small tanks. We're talking about 10-gallon tanks, 15-gallon tanks, or you can do the conversion in liters, 20 gallons, 29 gallons, 30 gallons, etc. The simple answer is no. Now, I don't want to discourage anybody that has a smaller aquarium and maybe you can't afford to have a larger aquarium, or maybe you don't have space for a larger aquarium. If that's the case, that's perfectly fine. There are a lot of wonderful fish, colorful, beautiful, interactive, that you can find for your smaller aquarium. In fact, some of the Tanganyikan fish that I like to keep are perfectly fine for smaller aquariums. But for the larger fish from Lake Malawi, any of those smaller tanks is just not a good idea. I've had people reach out to me and say, well, can I keep, one peacock in a 20-gallon aquarium? Yeah, I guess you could. Like, you could have one fish living alone in a 20-gallon aquarium, but that's not really a good life for that fish. It's kind of a small area where it can't swim very far, very fast. Obviously, there's no other fish to interact with, so quality of life may not be so great, although there wouldn't be aggression, obviously, because it would be by itself. But you know, why would you subject your fish to that? It's the same thing as like if someone were to ask me, you know, they live in a 2-bedroom apartment and it's 800 square feet, and they would say, I want to get a dog. I'm not going to tell them to get an 80-pound or 90-pound dog, a big German Shepherd. Yeah, you could do it. But if you're living in an apartment, you don't have a backyard, you don't have a large space for the dog to roam around in. So it's very difficult for that dog and for the dog owner. I would say get a smaller dog, get something that's 20, 25 pounds. It's easier to, you know, run around the house and pick up after when you take it for walks. And it's going to be better for everyone around. So kind of the same thing with aquariums, stick with what you have. So when it comes to Malawi cichlids, I'm going to say that nothing smaller than a 40-gallon tank is going to be appropriate. And really there's two common sizes when we talk about 40-gallon aquariums. Most of them are going to be a 40 breeder, which happens to be one of my favorite tanks as far as their footprint. The 40 breeder is 36 inches wide and it is 18 inches front to back, and I believe 17 inches tall. And then you have a 40-gallon long, which is 48 inches long, so it's a lot wider. It's 12 inches front to back, and I think it's like 16 inches tall. So either of those two probably would be about the same as far as the type of fish that you would keep. And in there, I would say to pick something on the smaller side or on the more docile side. So on the smaller side, you could do a lot of dwarf Mbuna species. Any of the Mbunas that are going to stay, you know, less than 3.5 to 4 inches long for the largest, and, you know, smaller a little bit on some of the smaller ones. I've got a bunch back here in a 75-gallon tank. They all are, you know, less than about 3.5 inches or so. So those are a dwarf Mbuna. They don't get as large. You still get all the colors. You still get all the same activity, the same interaction that you would have with a larger Mbuna, but they're smaller. So they could have it, you know, live in a 40-gallon tank pretty comfortably. My suggestion would be that if you do keep them in a 40-gallon tank, to have lots of line of sight breaks, meaning to have something in the aquarium that breaks the sight from one end to the other, so that way fish can hide on one side of the tank or the other side of the tank, and they won't get chased around by the fish seeing it, you know, directly across the tank. So if you have lots of rocks and hides and caves and things like that, a 40-gallon tank would be great for smaller Mbuna. Or you could do something more docile, like a yellow lab as an example, or an ACI, blue or purple yellowtail ACI. Those type of Mbuna are a little bit smaller, but also they are a lot less aggressive than some of the other species. So a lot of the issues that we have with African cichlids is not so much the size of the fish, but more so the aggressive nature of the fish. So if you have something that's a little bit more timid or not quite as crazy as, let's say, you know, a large zebra or a big peacock or something like that, then you should be okay with the 40-gallon tank. Now people say, well, why can't I keep a peacock or something like that in a 40-gallon tank? And I'm gonna say it's not that you can't, and in every situation there is an exception. I've done it before. I've kept peacocks in a 40 when I was growing them out, juveniles up to about the size of about 3.5 inches or so. And I've also done like breeding projects where I have a group of females and like one male in there. But generally speaking, my experience, it doesn't work well long-term because the fish get quite large and you could have some issues. The next aquarium size that I'm going to recommend for African cichlids is going to be the 55-gallon aquarium. This is probably one of the most common aquarium sizes when it comes to a larger aquarium. 48 inches wide, 13 inches front to back, I think 21 inches tall, and you pretty much can find them anywhere. They come in all forms and fashions, you know, glass, acrylic, different types of frames. It's a very common aquarium size. For a 55-gallon aquarium, I would say that you can do any of the species that I talked about before, any of those smaller Mbuna, or also some of those more docile Mbuna, or you could also do regular sized Mbuna, in my opinion. Now again, with the what I recommended with the line of sight breaks, you're gonna want the same thing with the 55-gallon aquarium, because you only do have that 13 inches front to back. So in some cases, there's not as much escape room or hiding room as some of the large aquariums. So if you have like a large decoration, a big piece of wood or fake wood or rock or fake rock in there that breaks up that line of sight break, that's very helpful when keeping fish in like a 55-gallon as an example. I would also kind of add to this tank size the 60 long. The 60 long and a 55 are basically the exact same tank, except that the 60 is just a little bit taller. I've got one upstairs with my Tanganyikans in it, so it looks exactly like a 55-gallon tank, but it's a little bit taller, and but basically the dimensions are the same. So 55 or 60 would work well in either situation. Now, a lot of people will probably fight me on this when it comes to peacocks, because a lot of people will say that you can definitely keep peacocks in a 55 or 60-gallon aquarium. In my experience, it's a little bit small, and the reason why is the behavior of the fish. So if you watch the behavior of an mbuna versus the behavior of a peacock, even though they're both from the same lake and they inhabit the same waters and they're both similar in size, they have different swimming behaviors and different swimming patterns, where an mbuna is going to be more prone to going in and out of rocks and caves, and will kind of swim up and down and around and through things. They could be in a little bit tighter situation just because of how they behave and how they swim around, where a peacock is a little bit more of an open water swimmer, so you want to have more space for that fish to kind of swim back and forth and chase each other around, where the mbuna, you have a different kind of swimming pattern. The other thing to think about is when you go to the aquarium store and you see these peacocks, they might look really beautiful at 4 inches, and you know, you think, oh, I could put a bunch of those in a 55-gallon aquarium. Well, they get really big. In fact, you can't tell because it's, you know, blurry and back there. But some of my fish in this tank, my peacock tank, they're 8 inches long, and they're big fish. In fact, I wasn't quite sure. I actually got out my my measuring tape the other day just to measure to see how big are these fish really. And there was a few of the larger males in there that were 8 inches from nose to tip of tail. So they can be quite large. And if you're talking about an aquarium that's only 13 inches front to back, and you've got an 8-inch fish in there, and there's a bunch of them swimming around and banging into each other, it's not quite enough room versus that extra size that you're going to have in the next tank size up, which is a 75-gallon tank. Now, before I get into the 75-gallon aquarium where kind of our world is opened up, I want to mention and talk about one other common aquarium size that's in between the 55 and the 75, and that is the 65-gallon aquarium. Now, this is where we talk about water volume versus dimensions. So the 65-gallon aquarium, and I have one around the corner here, which is one of my Planet aquariums. It is a smaller tank when it comes to the dimensions, basically width-wise and front to back. It is very similar to a 40 breeder, so it's 36 inches wide and 18 inches front to back. It's just taller, so think about a 40 breeder, but much taller. Basically, instead of being 17 inches tall like a 40 breeder, it's 24 inches tall. So basically, the way that I look at a 65-gallon aquarium is the way that I would look at a 40 breeder, just with more water volume to dissipate some, you know, the bioload, etc. I would say in a 65-gallon aquarium, I would treat it the same way as a 40 breeder as far as the fish, so smaller mbuna, or you could do regular size mbuna, again with lots of rock work and things like that, because you do have a few more inches of space there. But I wouldn't do anything larger than that, and I, again, treat it kind of more like a 40 breeder. So smaller mbuna, more docile mbuna like the ACI and the Yellow Labs, and maybe not so much the larger crazy big ones. So now we're getting into some of the larger tanks where we can start to experiment and, you know, keep some larger fish in there. So I'm going to put 3 tank sizes together in this next category, and that's going to be the 75-gallon aquarium, the 90-gallon aquarium, and the 120-gallon aquarium. And this is again where dimensions are more important than the water volume. So a 75-gallon is 48 inches wide, it's 18 inches front to back, and 21 inches tall. You move up to a 90-gallon, you get 15 more gallons of water, same dimensions, width-wise and front to back, 48 inches wide, 18 inches front to back, and then you get 24 inches tall, so it's a little bit taller. And then there's a 120. The 120, again, is 48 inches wide, but it's 2 feet front to back and 2 feet tall, 24 inches by 24 inches. So with all of these 3 tanks, I would say to keep kind of the same type of fish in these 3 tanks. I would do pretty much any kind of peacock you want, for sure, and any of your small haps in there. So any of your kind of more smaller decorative haps, you know, like a Z-Rock or electric blues, any of those haps that look like a peacock, similar colors, shapes, etc., but they're just a hap instead of a peacock, they would do fine. I would not do any of the larger predatory haps in these aquariums because they get to be 9, 10, 11, 12 plus inches, and it's just not enough space for a large fish that's this big. So I would not recommend a big group of larger predatory haps in one of these smaller tanks, but any of the peacocks and smaller haps would be just fine in a 75, a 90, or a 120. So the next step up from those tanks is kind of your big boy tanks. These are your 125s, your 180s, 150s, 240s, all of those larger tanks. They are 6 feet wide and, you know, at least 18 inches front to back or larger. So some of them are 8 feet, like the 240 is 8 feet wide. So with any of your 125s, 150s, 180s, 240s, any of those larger tanks, if you have a tank that's 6 feet wide and at least 18 inches front to back, then you can pretty much keep any Malawi cichlid. You could keep your larger haps in there, your aggressive predatory haps, and then all your peacocks, you know, any kind of mbuna, anything in there would be just fine. So larger tank, if you're watching this, you already know you keep, you know, 40 peacocks and haps in a 180, no problem. Not a whole lot to say there. So if you really want to have larger, you know, haps or a big group of peacocks, and you're going to want at least a 125-gallon aquarium. If you want to just have, you know, a smaller amount of peacocks and some smaller haps, 75, 90, 120, you're just fine. If you only have space for 55, think about, you know, maybe mbuna, smaller mbuna, peaceful mbuna, 40 breeder, same thing, 65 breeder, the same thing. So hopefully this long video by this point has been helpful for you to kind of understand aquarium sizes, dimensions versus water volume, and what would be appropriate. Now, the reason why, again, I share all of this is not because I don't think that people can't keep a certain fish in a certain size tank. It's to make things easier for you. So because of, you know, my 20 plus years of experience of keeping African cichlids and seeing them fight and kill each other and breeding them for profit, all that kind of stuff, I just know that for a lot of you, to make it easier, to make it more enjoyable when you keep these fish, you're going to want to stick by these guidelines. So if you made it this far, hopefully you like this video, so please give it a big thumbs up. And if you have not done so already, please do consider subscribing to my channel. That's all I had for now. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.